Please don't do this!
So stop me if you've heard this one before. A young man returns from the dead to avenge his girlfriend's murder. Oh yes, it was done absolutely brilliantly in 1994 in The Crow, starring Brandon Lee, directed by Alex Proyas, and adapted from the graphic novel by James O'Barr. Yet, there have been many attempts to relaunch the franchise in the years since, with us getting a whole slew of pretty awful sequels from Miramax and Dimension, as well as a TV show I think we'd all like to forget. But I have to say, Rupert Sanders' The Crow is one of the most controversial would-be blockbuster films in some times. You see, the rights holders to The Crow have spent over a decade trying to relaunch the character on the big screen. And while there was initially some enthusiasm, at least, when its star Bill Skarsgård was cast in the lead, once they revealed the first look at the character, many dismissed it offhand, saying that he looked like Jared Leto's the Joker in Suicide Squad, and the trailer was not well received at all, with people dismissing it again as for a wick and a stain on the memory of the original Brandon Lee classic. But here's the thing, there have been plenty of stains on the memory of the original Brandon Lee classic. In fact, I've been revisiting a whole bunch of them for our Crow movie ranked list, which is going to come out in a couple of days. The fact is, outside of the first movie by Alex Proyas, there's never been a really good Crow sequel. Tim Pope's The Crow, City of Angels definitely had its moments, but outside of that first movie, I mean, The Crow Salvation, The Crow Wicked Prayer, this franchise has been done to death in a pretty terrible way, so no matter how bad this reboot, as they call it, or whatever it is, was going to be, it was never going to be as bad as some of the other films in the franchise, because there have been some really abysmal ones. So to me, it's kind of strange that fans have started clutching their pearls over the fact that they're making another Crow movie, because again, we've got a lot of them and they've been awful. But would it surprise you to know that this version of The Crow is actually the second best Crow movie that we've ever seen? Okay, that doesn't mean that it's a great movie, mind you, because, again, there have been some terrible Crow movies, but it's actually nowhere near the disaster that some are expecting, and actually a pretty good little gothic action movie. Some interesting choices are made in the execution here, but not all good, because it's also frustratingly uneven and rather poorly paced, which makes it, of course, a mixed bag, but there's more good in this than there is bad. Would it surprise you to know that Bill Skarsgård's Eric, and you never find out his last name in order to distance themselves from the 1994 version, actually only becomes the Crow, as we know the character, in the final act of the film? Indeed, Eric and Shelley, who's played here by FKA Twigs, aren't even murdered until about 40 minutes into the film, with director Rupert Sanders trying to flesh out their love story. Alas, the romance isn't all that convincing, with them mostly going to raves, doing drugs, and having hastily shot love scenes set among billowing curtains. While Lionsgate's been hiding this one from critics, it's definitely a significantly better movie than their recent flop, Borderlands. It does help that Bill Skarsgård, who recently impressed me with his action chops in Boy Kills World, delivers a pretty fresh take on the character. In every other Crow movie, the lead was doing a riff on Brandon Lee's performance in the original, but Skarsgård doesn't do that. The late American rapper Lil Peep was obviously a heavy influence here, at least as far as the character's look went. A cynical drug addict we first meet in rehab, Eric is less of a romantic hero than Draven was. When revived, he doesn't immediately become a badass, as he spends much of the running time frightened and bewildered by his new powers. The premise is also different from the 94 movie and the graphic novel. The villain isn't top dollar, and Shelley's soul in this is damned because her mother sold her for fame and fortune to Danny Huston's Vincent Rogue, who maintains his immortality by collecting and corrupting the souls of the innocent that he can then send to hell, with Shelley one such soul. In the part, FKA Twigs does a good job selling the tortured, vulnerable aspect, although after the first act she becomes something of a non-entity as far as the film goes. This is Skarsgård's show through and through, with him nailing the action beats once he finally becomes the Crow, pretty late in the film. One thing is for sure, the R rating certainly was not an afterthought, with some genuinely grand guignol horror moments baked in, even if the blood is a little too CGI heavy for my liking. As the baddie, Rogue, Huston channels his father, John Huston's memorably lecherous performance in Chinatown, and he always brings a little gravitas to the proceedings. Sanders also gives the film a very solid score by All Quiet on the Western Front remake's composer Volker Bertelmann, along with an appropriate goth soundtrack with choices ranging from Joy Division to Gary Newman to Enya. And no, there are no songs by The Cure here because, let's face it, The Cure, especially because of their song Burn, is way too identified with the 1994 film, so they kind of go off in their own direction here. But it's a good soundtrack. However, the movie also has some shockingly inept scenes, such as a sense of pacing that at times feels like significant chunks of the film were removed. Some characters come and go, such as Eric's gun-dealing buddy, and they feel like they were meant to be significant characters but are just doing walk-ons. The detective work Eric puts in while tracking down Rogue is also shockingly inane, with him always lucking into finding a cell phone on whomever he killed last, which points to another address where even more bad guys are hiding. I mean, this is just stupid, folks. Yet, the movie still kinda gets a pass from me as there's some legitimately great set pieces. Towards the end, there's a major action sequence set in an opera that worked pretty well. But I have to say, why is it in movies that only bad guys ever seem to go to the opera? I'd love to see a movie where a hero actually goes to take in a little bit of culture, but alas. The denouement of this film also hits a pleasingly bittersweet note, if perhaps it's a little too convenient and leaves a little too much for potential sequel, which honestly, looking at the potential box office for this movie, I really don't think is even going to happen. It's also shot in a distinctly different way from the original, which I really liked, thanks to DP Steve Annis, who avoids the temptation to copy the original movie's famed film noir-style visuals. Well done. So, is this remake of The Crow a hidden gem in these dog days of summer? I wouldn't go that far. But in terms of a pulpy, goth-driven action movie, kind of in the vein of maybe the original Underworld, you could do a heck of a lot worse. I had a reasonably good time with this, so I give it a surprising 6 out of 10.
How many people have you loved?
I'll never be alone.